What is the health of this football team? We'll get the kind of X's and O's and we'll get the narratives going here in a second, but just to clear the deck on the health of the LSU football team.
Man, about as healthy as they've ever been going into an opener. It's odd. I was talking to a colleague today. LSU opened up against BYU in 2017, and there were something like 23 players unavailable, either due to injury, suspension, academic, something. It was so bizarre. And I mean, literally, Brian Kelly gave us an injury report on Monday, and there's 2 players listed. Senior receiver Chris Hilton is questionable with a bone bruise, and starting right guard Miles Frazier is probable, turned his ankle about a week and a half ago. But that's it, man. They have been remarkable. I mean, knock on wood, but they have been remarkably healthy in this camp. Injuries are not a problem. They're going to travel everybody.
Matt Zemek, I will let you take it away from here.
You know, Matt, there was an illness that apparently went through the LSU locker room a couple weeks ago. And obviously, you know, that's well before the game. So like that has run its course, at least presumably. And, you know, my inkling is it's not going to matter. But guys are trying to develop their fitness base. They're trying to develop their stamina. Is there a sense that that illness interrupted kind of the process for the guys that were affected? Just how do you think that the team is for all the guys who were affected by that gastrointestinal bug?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, Matt. Honestly, I mean, we've all had the runs and the you know, throw up for a time. I mean, you drink some electrolytes, and in a couple of days you're good, especially when you're 19, 20. Look, I would tell you if I think it was I genuinely don't think that's a problem. Brian Kelly had what he called his climatization process this year, so when they would practice, they would start indoors and then so they had an indoor-outdoor practice every day, and they would gradually increase the time outdoors. So, for example, maybe the first time outdoors, they were outdoors for 30 minutes, and then it was 40 minutes and 45, then an hour 15. So every day they would increase the amount of time they spent outside and decrease the time indoors. So, I mean, the fact that the game's played, you know, indoors in Vegas, I think all of that is inconsequential. They really are a healthy team. Now, we've talked about it before, guys. There's talent issues on the team. There's a whole new defensive staff. There's a lot of questions, but I don't think fitness, health, any of that is an issue that LSU's facing. I think they're about as good as you could hope for a week 1.
Matt, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I was curious about. So I'm really looking at the defense, and Blake Baker. Is it fair to assess the defense as maybe like a high risk, high reward kind of thing? Really an attacking defense. And then I think last time we were here, we were talking about the I guess lack of either a veteran outside presence or a proven outside presence in the secondary.
Yes.
You've been at practice. What have you seen? So we're scarred at SC from all these huge chunk plays and explosive plays we saw over the last couple of years. Are you seeing any of that, or do you see this defense, playing effectively?
So, yeah, Tim, I know the last time I was here, I kind of told you all that the LSU and SC were like that Spider-Man meme, you know, where they're like pointing at each other. I mean, these two teams are seriously what you're feeling. LSU fans are feeling the exact same, like positive and negative. Specifically to your point about the defense, LSU was 118th in the country in pass defense last year. It was very common that 16-yard catches became 60-yard house calls. Like LSU and SC, the same issues. The way you phrased it, high risk, high reward, is interesting. I do think this team is very clearly going to try to generate a pass rush, and probably to do it creatively, because I don't think they have a guy like Harold Perkins is great. And I think he's going to impact games every game he plays, and he's going to be a first-round pick. But there's no guy like, if y'all remember Arden Key or guys like Barkevius Mingo at LSU in the past that were double-digit sack guys where you could just say, hey, put your hand in the dirt and go get them. And the other team just didn't have a guy that could block them. That doesn't exist here. So I think they get creative in the way they bring pressure. But I don't know that I would say higher risk, higher reward, because what they've tried to do very clearly is simplify to prevent the chunk play. They'll give up the 16-yard catch. They just can't let the 16-yard catch become a 60-yard house call. So you'll see them almost stripped down to be so basic in the secondary to prevent those big plays. And from there, try to build on top of that base to get a little creative. But you can play fast and free and physical when you're not out of position, when you know where you're supposed to be. And that's, I think, conceptually how Blake Baker is addressing this here in his first season taking over this defense.
Yeah, the pointing continues. The pointing continues because that's been a theme out of SC.
It really is. Like, I think if I'm looking at the two teams, I think SC probably has more talent in the secondary. I still don't know that SC's defensive backs can line up man for man with LSU's receivers. And I think that the inverse is also true. It's really going to be fascinating to see how, D'Anton Lynn and Blake Baker, how they approach this, because I think both offenses are going to have a lot of success.
Let me piggyback on what you and Tim were talking about, and in terms of how LSU gets a pass rush, but also, as you were alluding to, how the secondary chooses to defend USC. Making sure not to give up the chunk play. I mean, that opens up a definite avenue for Lincoln Riley with Miller Moss in the first quarter. Establish those 7, 8, 12-yard, short, medium possession passes. I got to think that at some point, and remember, if you watch the Holiday Bowl, Miller Moss threw some passes that Louisville jumped, some short passes. And so Miller Moss, telegraphing a ball, or at least like going right to his first read, that's an area where opponents can get turnovers, maybe even pick sixes. So obviously you don't want to get beaten over the top. Like, that's absolutely true. That's sound football. Certainly in week one, like, you don't want to get, homered to death. But they're also, I would think, in film study of USC's offense, hey, there might be a chance for Miller Moss to lock onto a guy and you can jump a short route. So how do you think LSU tries to balance, don't play safe, but this is Miller Moss. He's not a proven guy the way Caleb Williams is. There's going to be a chance to really get in some passing lanes there.
Yeah, I think this is just a guess, Matt. I think, again, it's just my opinion. I think they're going to try to pressure him early to see if they can make him uncomfortable. Because, look, as much as I know SC fans are excited about Miller Moss and LSU fans are excited about Garrett Nussmeier, again, going back to the same thing, these are both guys that are fourth-year guys, class of 21. They were high 4 stars. They waited their turn behind Heisman winners. They got their chance in the bowl game, both threw for nearly 400 yards. Like, it's so similar. And I think the way that LSU is going to approach it is they're going to try to get creative, bring some different looks and pressures to see if they can get him off his spot and force him into some mistakes. We'll see if they can do that. If not, then they probably drop and play coverage. And then the question is, okay, well, if LSU drops and plays coverage, is the front seven good enough to line up, win one-on-ones, and stop the run? And as you alluded to, sort of that short intermediate passing game. And that's a big question, guys, because on the defensive front, I mean, everybody knows Harold Perkins, and I think LSU's defensive ends are good. Not just good by comparison, but they're good players. They're veteran players. I don't need to run through all the names, but they're deep and talented there. And I think they're, again, I'm not telling you there's an All-American there, but I'm telling you there's good players that can play at this level and look like SEC ends. But on the interior, man, they've got guys that are 22 and 23 years old, but guys that have just not played a lot of football and haven't been very productive players. So what happens if SC decides, okay, well, if you're going to give me a 6-man box and you line and run it, can LSU stop the run? And I don't have a great answer to that question. I think that is a giant mystery that a year ago was an absolute abomination. And I think LSU worked very hard this offseason, replacing its staff and trying to fortify the interior of its defensive line. They had a 5th and a 6th year, 2 6th-year senior defensive tackles out of the transfer portal. They added a 5-star freshman in Don McKinley, who we may see in this ball game. But I mean, that is a giant mystery, guys. I mean, you can tell, like, I'm apprehensive because I think both offenses are going to have a lot of success in this game, and it's going to come down to which defense can find the key stop here or there. I find it hard to believe, guys, that we're looking at a low 20s game. I mean, I just don't know that that's in the cards. And it's not to say both defenses won't be improved, because I think they will. I think Danton Lynn is a really good defensive coordinator, and they'll simplify and make him good. And I think the same with Blake Baker. I just think they both have real, sincere challenges with the offenses that they drew in week 1. I mean, I don't care if it's not Caleb Williams, it's still Lincoln Riley. And everywhere he's been, his offenses go. So I just think it's going to be a really fun game that will probably, both teams will probably, when the season ends, will look back at that first week and go, okay, that was the outlier. That was the exception, not the rule. Our defense was much better than in that game. And it was just a matter that they ran up against a really good offense in week 1.
I mean, I think that the key to this game, and I wrote about it, was the fact that we need to get pressure. And the big story coming for LSU, all the USC fans talk about your guys' offensive line. But you brought up the wide receivers, and you talked about Hilton getting hurt. And could you maybe speak to the rest of the receiver room? You said that they'd be difficult to cover, matchup man to man. Can you talk about Kyron Lacy and the rest of the guys, and how maybe they're going to, if they do go without Chris Hilton, what the situation will be in the wide receiver room for the Tigers?
Sure. So Kyron Lacy is a guy who is a star. He was just behind 2 first-round picks last year. I mean, you guys know what that's like. I mean, you've had great receivers there in the past. You have to wait their turn. So that's Kyron. He wears number 2. There was a really cool video on draft night when Kyron was FaceTiming with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, and they were saying, man, this is you next year. This is you next year. And it feels that way. Like, he's got the size, the speed. He runs fast. He jumps high. He's got great hands. He gets great separation, runs good routes. I mean, he's what they look like. He was just behind 2 first-round picks last year and still had nearly 600 receiving yards. The other guy that's maybe a little wild card is CJ Daniels. So he wears number 4, and he's a Liberty transfer. So he was a 1,000-yard receiver at Liberty last year. And I think my question when they added him was, would it translate from the G5, to the SEC level? And he's a big, thick, put together kid. I mean, I think Daniels is, I'd say Lacy is going to be the guy, the number 1, the alpha. I think Daniels is going to be Nussmeier's security blanket. It's 3rd and 4, and you need the 8-yard completion over the middle. He's going to CJ Daniels because he's going to catch it every time. Hilton is interesting, guys, because I think Hilton's the game breaker. He's the guy that kind of is the Brian Thomas of this year. And I don't know if you remember this, but Malik Neighbors had almost 90 catches for 1,700 yards. But Brian Thomas led the country in receiving touchdowns last year. He was just the big dude that nobody could run with downfield. And when Jaden took his shots, he went to Brian Thomas. And I think that's Chris Hilton in this offense. So if he's not there, that is a significant weapon off the field if he's not there or limited. But guys, I mean, LSU is never going to be short on receiving options. I mean, I could run through other names. I mean, Aaron Anderson was a 5-star. Shelton Sampson was a 5-star. Xavion Thomas is a transfer who was Mississippi State's leading receiver last year. They got guys. They got guys, and they're gonna sling it around. But I do think if you're looking for one guy that potentially could take over the game, it's Kyron Lacy, where's number 2, and he's next, right? If you look in that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Malik, Brian, like that who's next? Well, Kyron Lacy would be next.
You guys got that. Watch number 2.
Watch number 2. If Kyron Lacy struggles this year, Tim, I would. Like, if you told me Kyron went in at the end of this season had like 40 catches for 600 yards, I would be fall over stunned. I mean, I'd believe I grow a full head of hair before that. It's just like he's. I mean, you all know what it looks like when there's a guy that just is better than everybody at this level, and he's one of those guys. He's just better than most of the guys. And unless if you run up against a Derek Stingley or something like that, a guy that's going to be a round 1 corner, like. There aren't college kids that can run with a guy like that. So he's gonna have a great year. He's gonna have a great year.
Matt, the last time we had you on, the running back situation was a bit of a a mystery as well, although Caleb Jackson was the name that I think came off your lips first and foremost. Has anything changed there or developed in regards to what's expected?
Yeah, so I think Caleb Jackson is the name. Caleb Jackson is the name offensively that nobody knows today, that at the end of the season, I think everybody knows. But he's not going to be the bell cow, at least not to start. Brian Kelly's been pretty clear about this, Mark. So Josh Williams is a former walk-on who earned a Scott. He was a walk-on of the 2019, the championship team with Joe Burrow. He walked on that team and has stuck around. Now he's in his 6th season. And last week we found out he got the number 18 jersey. If you don't know, that's an honor in LSU where it's been passed down, year to year. It goes to a great team guy, a leader. So he'll be wearing a new jersey number. He's been 27 in his career, but he'll be an 18 on Sunday night. And Brian Kelly told us, man, like literally after the first practice of fall camp, he's like, we know what Josh Williams can do. We just got to get him to Saturdays. So like they barely used him in fall camp to keep him fresh because I think they are planning on giving him 150 carries this season, which is very surprising. Now, he's not a guy that's going to wow you. All right, this isn't Reggie Bush or Lendale White or Leonard Fournette or Darius Geis or Jeremy Hill or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's not an NFL guy, right? But he's a guy that runs tough between the tackles. He can pass block. He catches the ball out of the backfield. He knows everybody's assignment. He's just a really good college football player. And I can't tell you that I'm super confident if they give him 150 carries that it's a great success this year, because we've seen good running backs at LSU. I know what it looks like, and there's just a physical ability deficiency there with Josh. It's not his fault, but he's a really good college football player. But Caleb Jackson's the one that has the potential to be the game breaker. And I think as the season goes along, I don't know if you see this on Sunday night, Mark, but as the season goes along, the more attempts he gets, I think the more productive Caleb Jackson is, the harder it is to justify not having him on the field. I don't know that he gets maybe more than 5 to 7 carries against SC. We'll see how the game goes. But that's one of those things that if you catch me in November, I could see that flipping where Caleb Jackson is the bell cow for LSU and Williams is maybe a secondary role to Caleb.